some positive leftist news with Mexi.
Happy PLN Day, everyone! This is airing exactly one day after my birthday, actually, and what a glorious birthday month it was. Striketober came in swinging like a big, beautiful wrecking ball, didn't it? So cheers, my friends, the world over. Let's keep this momentum going. Indigenous people are once again on the front lines of the climate crisis as an armed group allegedly tied to the Mapuche Territorial Alliance successfully seized the Maleco National Reserve in Chile, resisting the violent state destruction of, as they put it, all forms of life in the territory. The Mapuche are demanding the restoration of their ancestral lands and self-determination. Indigenous territories make up around 22% of the planet's land surface, yet they hold 80% of the world's biodiversity. Respecting Indigenous sovereignty and governance is essential, not only in our fight against settler capitalism, but if we are to prevent climate catastrophe. Climate justice is Indigenous sovereignty. This is clear in the US and Canada as well, where Indigenous land and water protectors, including Six Nations activists and their allies at 1492 Landback Lane, helped reduce annual greenhouse gas emissions by 25%. A few months ago, we reported that the Haudenosaunee land defenders were successful in stopping a commercial housing development on their territory, and now we're happy to report that those who were arrested for their stand are seeing those charges dropped. Courtney Skye, a policy analyst from Six Nations who was arrested in September of 2020 after visiting the protest camp, had charges of mischief, disobeying a court order, and breach of conditions withdrawn on October 12th. Micah Burning, who organized a legal fund that has raised nearly $507,000 towards the defense of Skye and other supporters, had her charges dropped over the summer. Hamilton musician Tom Wilson and Six Nations musician Phil Davis faced charges of mischief and breaching a court order after performing at the site. Those charges have been withdrawn, as were the same charges against Indigenous journalists Carl Dockstader and Starla Myers. However, not all landback activists are in the clear. Spokesperson Skylar Williams faces multiple charges in connection with the occupation. Williams was also arrested in September in Toronto after speaking at a rally outside the condo building of Mayor John Tory in support of the city's unhoused people who were living in encampments. The fight continues until all charges against Williams are dropped. After over 7 years of court hearings, arrests, and fierce resistance from the Mi'kmaq community, the controversial Alton Gas Project in Nova Scotia has been cancelled. This project would have used water from the Shubenacadie River in Nova Scotia to create large underground storage caverns for natural gas. Members of the Shubenacadie First Nation raised concerns that the project would damage and pollute the 73-kilometer tidal river with toxic brine, making it dangerously saline, especially to native fish like the three-spined stickleback. Doreen Bernard, a Mi'kmaq grassroots grandmother and water protector of the Shubenacadie Band, described the river as a major artery for our people, which has a very significant historical, spiritual, and cultural relevance to who we are. Congratulations and our heartfelt gratitude to all of the water and land protectors that made this happen. In so-called British Columbia, Canada, the Git and Max band stood their ground against the colonial social work system that has taken countless Indigenous children away from their families and communities. Allies joined the band's hereditary chiefs in blocking road access as a social worker entered the Hazelton, BC Reserve to take a 6-year-old girl back into foster care. The girl was visiting her matrilineal family for a week in Git and Max and belongs to the Gitlulim Hexwit House of the Gitxsan Nation. According to the community, instead of re-entering the racist foster care system, which has been compared to a modern-day residential school system, the child has been placed in the protection of her house group. On Instagram, Colin Sutherland Wilson posted that she is surrounded by loved ones, learning our language, playing with cousins, and hearing the stories of her ancestors. Ultimately, there was a great sense of relief and empowerment as we all stood together and we all stood up for the young citizen of our Gitxsan people. The action was followed by a rally at the Ministry of Children and Family Development Office demanding that the province cede control over child welfare to the Gitxsan Nation. On Indigenous Peoples Day this month, hundreds of protesters led by Indigenous activists across the U.S. demonstrated in front of the White House to demand that Joe Biden stop approving fossil fuel projects and declare the climate crisis a national emergency. Protesters spray-painted the words "Expect Us" on the base of a statue of Andrew Jackson outside the White House. Jackson led the violent and lethal repression of Indigenous peoples in the Trail of Tears. Expect us is part of the phrase respect us or expect us, which many Indigenous women have been using while demonstrating against Enbridge's Line 3 pipeline, which protesters called on Biden to block immediately. The Indigenous Environmental Network wrote in a statement, if President Biden was committed to honoring the treaties and strengthening sovereignty, he would implement a policy of free, prior, and informed consent by executive authority and act swiftly to mitigate the climate chaos that has engulfed our communities by ending the anti-Indigenous U.S. legacy of fossil fuel extractivism. Hear, hear. And in Mexico City, a statue of an Indigenous woman will replace the capital's monument to Christopher Columbus, which was removed last year after Indigenous activists threatened to tear it down. The new statue will be a replica of the young woman of Amayac. This change was announced on Indigenous Peoples Day in the US, which in Mexico and other Latin American countries is known as Dia de la Raza, or Day of the Race, which many view as a commemoration to Native resistance against European conquest. We are so happy to report that Striketober has been raging across America. We saw 2,000 Buffalo hospital workers, 2,000 Washington carpenters, 1,000 Alabama miners, 700 Massachusetts nurses, 450 West Virginia steelworkers, 420 Kentucky whiskey workers, 350 Denver janitors, 300 Los Angeles aerospace manufacturers, 200 Reno bus drivers, 100 Pennsylvania teachers, 75 San Antonio symphony musicians, 50 West Virginia machinists, 10,000 John Deere manufacturing workers, and several others. Now, this isn't normally how we do things here on PLN, but we're going to actually play a clip from ABC News recapping some of the major strike events, because it just tickles me so much to see this on mainstream news.
Strike at John Deere, just the latest in a wave of labor stoppages across the country. There is a new militant spirit in the American workforce. Workers want more, and they're willing to strike to get it. This morning, 10,000 workers at John Deere hit the picket lines in Iowa, Illinois, and Kansas. They argued that even as the agricultural equipment company's profits grew by 61% in recent years, and their CEO's salary grew by 160% during the pandemic, their pay has actually been cut.
We need to let them know that they can't continue to take our money and take our money and take our money.
Across the country, labor is on the march. In California and Oregon, 24,000 nurses and other healthcare workers at Kaiser Permanente voted to authorize a strike over pay and better working conditions. Meanwhile, union workers at Kellogg's cereal plants have been on strike for more than a week, angry about long hours, including 7-day work weeks. And soon, Hollywood may see a walkout. 60,000 film and TV crew members could walk off the job Monday over what they claim are unfair working conditions.
Our hours are really grueling, and we need not just rest between the workdays and over the weekend, but an actual meal break during the day.
And across the country, a record number of workers are quitting their jobs. 4.3 million Americans, or 2.9% of the workforce, left their jobs in August. Many are looking for better work conditions and pay, especially with inflation on the rise. Several forces are driving all of this. As the pandemic comes to an end, companies are seeing sky-high demand and very tight labor markets. They're having trouble filling jobs. Workers notice that top executives and bosses are getting paid, and so for the first time in a long, long time, workers have the upper hand.
Oh, they've had enough, all right. I want to give a big red salute to this Kellogg's worker who held down the picket line overnight in Omaha through torrential rain. The potential film and TV strike they mentioned, which would have frozen productions in Hollywood and across the US, was averted at the last minute as a deal was reached with the 60,000 behind-the-scenes workers who stood firm and got the goods. The International Alliance of the Theatrical Stage Employees said the agreement addresses their core issues, including reasonable rest periods, meal breaks, a living wage for those on the bottom of the pay scale, and significant increases in compensation to be paid by new media companies. Striketober has not only been huge, it's been global. On October 20th, 500,000 South Koreans walked off the job in a massive general strike. The plan is to follow the strike with mass demonstrations in urban centers and rural farmlands, culminating in a national all-people's mobilization in January of 2022. The Korean Confederation of Trade Unions, the country's biggest labor union umbrella with 1.1 million members, is organizing these mobilizations in a broad-based front with South Korea's urban poor and farm farmers. The strikers put forward 15 demands that can be summarized as abolishing irregular work, which is part-time, temporary, or contract labor with little to no benefits, extending labor protections to all workers, giving workers power in economic restructuring decisions during times of crisis, and nationalizing key industries and socializing basic services like education and housing. With 40% of workers in the country considered irregular workers, laboring predominantly in the gig economy, and with South Korea ranking 3rd in highest annual working hours and 3rd in workplace deaths among OECD countries, it's no wonder they're putting out such based anti-capitalist media, first of all, but also fantastic to see worker organization at this level. Solidarity with all workers taking aim at the dystopian nightmare we live in. In Berlin, Striketober has paid off. After a month-long strike by healthcare workers at Vivante's hospital, the owners finally agreed to lighten the load on its overworked, understaffed, and undercompensated nurses. More staff will be hired, and nurses who have to work understaffed shifts will now be compensated with payouts and time off. Lead negotiator Heike von Graudeleski-Ballen said, "With the agreement on key points, we are a big step closer to our goal of achieving lasting workload relief for workers at Vivantes." She said it has been possible to reach this goal because the workforce has stood up firmly for its interests, with protests, with determination, and with stamina. Back in June, 12 workers at Voodoo Doughnut in Portland went on strike due to growing concerns of temperatures inside the workplace, which rose to or above 115 degrees Fahrenheit or 46 degrees Celsius during Oregon's record-breaking heat wave. The strike lasted 2 days, after which Voodoo Doughnut fired 9 of the striking workers on the bogus charge of workplace abandonment. But Striketober smiles upon us, and on October 6th, the National Labor Relations Board ruled in the workers' favor, telling the Doughnut Workers United that 7 of the 9 terminated workers will have their jobs reinstated with back pay. The Voodoo Doughnut workers in Portland partnered with Industrial Workers of the World to take this to the NLRB. Doughnut Workers United member Mark Medina said, "Doughnut Workers United would like to thank our community for all your continued support. We are all the working class, and together we can build a better future for us all." In a first for the tabletop role-playing sector, workers at Paizo, publisher of the Pathfinder and Starfinder games, have formed the United Paizo Workers Union, created with the help of the Communication Workers of America, which has been working for several years to organize labor in the video game industry. UPW's news release states that their organizing is in response to inconsistent hiring practices, pay inequity across the company, allegations of verbal abuse from executives and management, and allegations of harassment ignored or covered up by those at the top. Indeed, former worker Jessica Price posted on Twitter about the unfair hiring and disciplinary practices, unclean working conditions, sexual harassment, and verbal abuse she endured while she was at the company. Paizo has voluntarily recognized the union, and collective bargaining will begin soon, with increased wages to match the current cost of living to be the first issue the union tackles. Faculty members at St. Petersburg College in Florida have voted 193 to 56 to establish a union, enabling them to fight for better working conditions, pay, pensions, and workplace equality. As one faculty member stated, unionizing is a way to get some of that faculty voice back. This is a huge turnaround in the mentality of the staff, given that in 2016, the majority of the staff did not vote in favor of unionization. Uber has to pay out millions of pounds in pension payments to UK drivers dating back as far as 2017. We reported in March of this year that UK Supreme Court ruled that Uber drivers are employees, not contractors, unless they are entitled to a minimum hourly wage, holiday pay, and pensions. Beginning late last month, drivers will now be auto-enrolled onto a scheme through which Uber will contribute 3% of earnings into a pension pot. Drivers can also choose to contribute up to 5% of qualifying earnings, but are able to opt out. Mick Ricks, national officer of the GMB union, said Uber's pension scheme is a massive step in the right direction and will no doubt help thousands of drivers as they reach retirement age. GMB urges other platform-based operators to follow their lead. Cuba has now become the first country in the world to roll out COVID-19 vaccines for children as young as 2, and is among the few nations in the world to vaccinate children under 12 years old. Unlike Pfizer and Moderna, all of Cuba's vaccines are made with technology that has been used with children for decades. The clinical trials showed that after 2 doses of Soberana 2, 99.3% of 3 to 11-year-old children and 92.9% of 12 to 18-year-old children had an antibody response that was 4 times the pre-vaccination level, a superior response to that of adults. This rollout is so significant because the criminal US blockade, which has been tightened, has imposed obstacles on Cuba's response to the pandemic, denying the country access to purchasing ventilators and syringes, although happily millions were donated from solidarity activists and governments around the world. This achievement in Cuba's accelerated vaccine rollout may also go some way in reducing the US-backed exploitation of their COVID situation for the purposes of anti-communist propaganda and foreign intervention. Far-right conspiracy theorist and InfoWars host Alex Jones is liable for damages to families of children murdered in the 2012 Sandy Hook massacre after he repeatedly refused to produce documents for the court cases. Following the shooting, the families of those who were killed were inundated with death threats and harassment, prompted by conspiracy theories that the shooting was a hoax, with Alex Jones being one of the most high-profile promoters of these baseless claims. Texas Judge Maya Gamble said the court finds that defendants' failure to comply is greatly aggravated by their consistent pattern of discovery abuse throughout similar cases pending before this court. The court finds that defendants' discovery conduct in this case is the result of flagrant bad faith and callous disregard for the responsibilities of discovery under the rule. After a 30-year fight for justice, 14 men, including ex-President Blaise Compaoré, are now on trial in Burkina Faso for the assassination of revered Marxist revolutionary leader and Pan-African hero Thomas Sankara, who was murdered in a 1987 coup. During his time in power, Sankara implemented a socialist program of nationalization, land distribution, and mass social welfare that was transformative for the country. His government was credited for profound transformations in education and healthcare, and for instituting social reforms, including those that elevated women. He lent staunch support for independence from old and modern forms of colonialism throughout Africa. What the victims and I are expecting to gain in this trial is truth and justice, said Prosper Farama, one of the lawyers for those killed. Barbados has said a huge fuck you to the Commonwealth and the British monarchy by announcing plans to remove Queen Elizabeth II as head of state and become a republic by the island's 55th anniversary of independence in November of 2021. Barbados' Governor General said it was time for the island to leave its colonial past behind and embrace a new constitution. On October 8th, a Turkish court acquitted 18 students and one faculty member who were charged for their participation in a pride march on a university campus in 2019, saying their actions did not constitute a crime. They were charged for refusing to disperse by police who used pepper spray, plastic bullets, and tear gas to break up the march. Pride marches have been repeatedly banned throughout Turkey in recent years, with police at this event being caught on video yelling, "We are against your existence." Very happily, though, the defense lawyer Oku Didem Aydin won the case, stating that freedom of expression was a constitutional right, solidarity with everyone fighting for LGBTQ rights under Erdogan's repressive regime. Switzerland has legalized same-sex marriage with 64% voting yes. They also legalized adoption by same-sex couples and sperm donation for lesbians. Switzerland has officially become the 17th European country to legalize same-sex marriage. Fantastic, however, in 2021 it is appalling that it is not legal everywhere. Mexico has opened its first trans clinic in Mexico City this month. This clinic is run by trans people themselves and offers hope to the LGBTQ community for stigma-free medical care, sparing patients the shame, abuse, and discrimination that they are too often forced to face when seeking medical care. Absolutely fantastic. France's National Assembly has unanimously voted to ban conversion therapy, which honestly should have been banned long ago. If passed by the whole parliament, the new law will be a major win for the campaign against the widely discredited homophobic and just unconscionable practice. On the 20th of October, Netflix employees staged a walkout in response to the company platforming washed-up anti-political correctness warrior Dave Chappelle's special, which included transphobic rants. The employees who participated in the walkout wrote in a letter that they want Netflix to adopt measures to avoid future instances of platforming transphobia and hate speech and address a list of demands including increasing its funding for trans and non-binary talent and executives, revising internal procedures around commissioning and releasing sensitive works, and acknowledgement of the harm Netflix has done in platforming transphobic content. San Marino, a microstate located within Italy, voted to legalize abortion. Since 1865, abortion has been banned in this state, currently carrying a penalty of up to 3 years in prison for the people having the abortion and 6 years for the doctors who conduct the procedure. Over the past 2 decades, attempts to legalize abortion were sabotaged by a succession of mostly conservative governments. But finally this month, 77% of voters approved a motion enabling people with uteruses to terminate pregnancies up to 12 weeks. Since San Marino has long lagged behind other European countries on women's rights and the Italian Pope Francis still insists that abortion is murder, this is a huge win. The fact that the majority of young people voted in favor of legalizing abortion can give us hope that things will keep changing for the better on this front. Benin in Western Africa also voted to legalize abortion within the first 3 months of pregnancy, so long as the pregnancy is shown to aggravate or cause material, educational, professional, or moral distress incompatible with the woman or the unborn child's interest. This would be the case for most abortions. The Minister of Health stated that in Benin, nearly 200 women die each year as the result of abortion complications. The new law will not only provide relief for those with unwanted pregnancies, but will also save countless lives as people will now have access to safer abortion procedures. In an act of incredible solidarity, Belgium has announced that it will be the first country in the world to fund abortions for Polish people suffering under the near-total ban that leaves Polish people unable to access this medical care. Belgium has offered 10,000 euros of funding to the group Abortion Without Borders, which helps cover the cost of having an abortion in another European country for those that cannot afford it. The announcement comes just a few days after a Polish anti-choice organization called for even further criminalization of people who support the rights of others to access abortion. We love to see this kind of amazing solidarity across borders. In an incredible initiative, the Calm Line hotline in Bogota, Colombia, takes calls from men who are struggling with jealousy, control issues, and fear. The aim of the hotline is to combat violence against women by dismantling what experts say is the root cause, machismo, helping men to understand their emotions and take accountability for their actions. By encouraging men to examine how their internalized patriarchal attitudes and actions are harming themselves and others, the hotline hopes to create a profound cultural shift. The initiative challenges assumptions that it is women's responsibility to mitigate the harm and deal with the after effects of male violence. Instead, it places responsibility squarely on the shoulders of would-be abusers to manage their emotions and actions. The Australian government is offering one-off payments of $5,000 for victims who need help leaving violent partners. While this measure doesn't address the root cause of the violence, it will help countless victims and survivors of abuse to leave violent relationships. New legislation in California will require public schools in the state to provide free period products starting from the next school year. This is one step towards menstrual equity, ending period poverty, and reducing a potential barrier to education for students who menstruate. A tribunal has ruled in favor of Kate Wilson, an environmental and social justice activist who was deceived into a 2-year sexual relationship with a spy cop. The judges ruled overwhelmingly that the police violated Wilson's human rights in several ways, including inflicting degrading treatment on her. They said the senior officers appeared to have a policy of don't ask, don't tell towards their spies who were deceiving women into sexual relationships, and that they probably had a lack of interest in protecting women's human rights. The ruling sets a major legal and political precedent, establishing that this was indeed state-authorized abuse and giving the judiciary independent oversight of the police. Colin Boyd, the tribunal's vice president, and 2 other judges said were it not for Wilson's tenacity and perseverance, often in the face of formidable difficulties, much of what this case has revealed would not have come to light. She fought a large part of the case herself as she could not afford lawyers. There were over 50 other women who were deceived into relationships like this, which this case holds implications for. Another victim, Lisa Lon, said this is an enormous achievement for Kate, but also for all of us who have been fighting for over a decade to expose the institutional nature of what was done to us by the police and to others before us. Finally, a court has listened. It is beyond time to abolish this racist and misogynist institution. Comrades, if you have good news from the current month, please send your stories to veganvanguardpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you to Javi for the positive news jams. Thank you to Halcyon for the positive news background. Thank you to Catherine for script writing help on this one. And thank you to Tristan for editing this video. Thank you also to our glorious patrons who make the show possible. If you'd like to become a sustaining member, please go to patreon.com/positiveleftistnews, or you can give us a one-time tip or donation via PayPal. The link is in the description box below.
Sometimes